Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the RISC-V RISE software ecosystem series of tech talks. This morning, I have the privilege to be in the company of several heavy hitters, Ian Ferguson, Steve Wanless, and Ron Pacheco. I suppose, Ian, do you want to tell us something about RISE so we just kind of get that out front and center so that people are aware that, we are taking the software ecosystem enablement really, really serious. And we're putting our money where our mouth is, all the prospective companies joining within the foundations to ensure success within the software realm.
There's a non-trivial amount of work to be done. And there's foundational things that it just makes sense for everyone to collaborate on and do it in a consistent way. So compiler technology, build farms, operating systems, firmware, right? UEFI, ACPI kinds of frameworks. It makes minimal sense for 10 companies to go off and do their own things individually. It makes sense for people to really come through together and collaborate around those things. There's a consistent way of how that software operates. Because if we're going to be successful at growing this ecosystem even further into the sorts of applications that we talked about, again, if I put my pretend to be RedHat for a minute, they're not going to want to see very different software if it's a SiFive system or if it's a ReVos system or a TensTorrent system or other members of RISC-V. They need to see one common architecture for that software to come up. Now, we have to make sure there's opportunities for innovation and differentiation beyond that, but we need a very consistent foundational framework. And so, a number of companies, us, RedHat, MediaTek, Intel, Samsung, Qualcomm, NVIDIA, etc., come together and work on those common foundational building blocks, right? Where, as I say, LLVM compilers, etc., get those things implemented in a consistent way. There are other sets of, and they'll invest dollars and they'll invest people to create that critical mass of activity around those activities, and also fund work where there might be interest from the partners, but actually there's not the expertise inside the group. So they'll put out bids for work around, we've been looking at DPDK in the area of networking, SBDK. We've been looking at other areas of optimizations for the RISC-V instruction set. They'll go off and do those bids. We've been looking at things like Opti frameworks and things like that. So think of it as those foundational blocks where coming together is the right way to get everything done consistently, so those members can go off and focus on their areas of value add and differentiation in other parts of the system. Is that fair? Steve, Ron, what would you add or completely correct this old man?
Oh no, I'd say that was very fair. I think that where we are in the stage of RISC-V hardware and software evolution, certainly at the operating system level, what we're trying very hard to make sure of is that we have some degree of standardization at the interface between the hardware and the operating system, so that one binary image of an operating system will boot across multiple pieces of hardware. And I mean, while that's convenient for us, I think actually that's something that the market is going to want to drive heavily. I'd also probably take a little bit of issue with something that you said earlier, and that is that hardware's eating the world. What I would say is that I think that there's a lot of innovation going on in hardware at the moment. I think there's a lot of diversity in the hardware that's being brought to market. And it's the combination of hardware and software that, for instance, has enabled the whole artificial intelligence hype bubble that we're living in inside it at the moment, because you wouldn't have a lot of artificial intelligence workloads without dedicated hardware that was supporting that
Yeah.
workload. And in order to make that hardware usable, certainly the operating system components have got to be there to enable that. So you could say that hardware's eating the world, but it's only doing that because software's tied on the napkin around its neck.
Yeah, so if I was gonna jump into this little tit for tat, obviously, look, the important thing here is that RISC-V is an open source, open standards based architecture, along with open source software. And the fact that it started off with not just an open source, but open standards, I think allowed it to grow rapidly. And as Steve said, from an operating system perspective, we want to have one instruction set that we can work with. That then the part that remains the same, so they can be differentiation on top of it. And that is what's going to enable technologies or architectures like RISC-V to go and actually significantly advance what's happening in the AI space, in the HPC space, in the traditional commercial space. And I think that's the beauty for what we see here, because I would say if we look at where we are today with RISC-V versus the more recent ones, right? The more recent ones took forever because it took a while to agree to the open standards, because without those standards, we have all this fractured hardware that then actually fractures the entire software ecosystem that kind of really creates the big impediment. And for me, that's the excitement around RISC-V, then working with partners like Ian and SiFive to start driving that innovation rapidly and then be able to respond to the market with hardware the way we traditionally expect software to be driving that response to market dynamics. I don't think we have seen this. I haven't really seen this in my career with all the architectures that I have been involved with. And it's not that they were lacking. I think it's the fact that RISC-V started with the whole open source design that now creates this ability to be able to fuel innovation, that there are really no limits to what we do, either with the hardware or the software, because everyone always starts to thinking about edge. Great. Absolutely. That's a good way to kind of go fill the fabs and get a lot of familiarity with it, but that's not where it's relegated. I see how it's rapidly going to move into the clouds as an example, because this ability to constantly adapt to the changing demands of workloads and end user needs is going to be key for us to be able to continue to accelerate this digital economy that we're all contributing to.
Yeah, maybe.
And I think one thing we haven't touched on yet for the group of us is, I think part of the impetus as to why the four of us are sitting here talking about this is that recently Red Hat had its premier customer event, Red Hat Summit, and as part of the announcements of product enhancement that were made at Red Hat Summit, we jointly announced the availability of a developer's preview of Red Hat Enterprise Linux 10, which is the brand new version of Red Hat Enterprise Linux that was announced at Summit. We announced the availability of a developer's preview for RHEL 10 on top of the SiFive Hi5 Premier 550 platform. So that's a big reason why I think the four of us are sitting here talking about RISC-V today, is certainly from perhaps my bias point of view. I think that the availability of Red Hat Enterprise Linux on the SiFive platform is really sending a message to the potential customers of RISC-V running Linux that this is serious. This really is something that's going to happen, and it's going to happen in a much compressed time frame than other instruction sets have evolved. And I think that the availability of the developers preview for RHEL 10 on a SiFive platform really is indicating to the market that bang, the gun's gone, the race has started. We really are going to start moving very quickly at this point now. I know that several of our large financial service customers are already doing some evaluation of RISC-V. because they're looking into the future in terms of what infrastructure are their data centers going to contain in perhaps 5 years' time. The combination of an enterprise Linux implementation and serious hardware should be sending a message to them that this is something that you can't discount.
Nicely put. Nicely put.
Steve, I'll pile on that a little bit, because I remember when you and I were having the conversation, or it was actually years ago, right, in terms of getting that on our strategic plans and moving forward. But then even then, as we were looking at what can we do for the summit, is the open collaboration, particularly we had with Ian and his team, to actually make this thing happen at a pace I've never seen anybody actually put hardware with the commercial operating system out in the market. So I think it's credit to sort of what the open design, open standards has done to make this happen quickly. The other part, and I think, one of the important parts of why that developer preview is important on RHEL 10 is because the ecosystem runs, from the alpha and the omega in terms of the open source communities. We talk about compilers and tool chains and operating systems. Then the hardware vendors that need that, and they'll be able to bring up hardware. But then the key thing is actually having applications. And we know that the commercial software part of the industry sometimes is shy about working with community software, because it's doing what it's supposed to do. It's actually driving innovation at a rapid pace. But a lot of the commercial partners are looking for some kind of level of stability in order to start to build and develop applications. And that's why having that developer preview is so important for the commercial side of the application development market to actually start to learn how to work with RISC-V and start building applications. I don't care how small they are, that becomes important, because now we're actually engaging the entire ecosystem from a software perspective, and then with Ian's help, actually creating new opportunities on what can happen from a hardware perspective. Now we have enough going into the market with having Fedora being there. Steve, you didn't mention CentOS Stream. I think you need to, and RHEL. Now we can meet developers of all types wherever they want to be, while we're actually maturing this thing in real time.
Yeah. So yeah, I was going to mention the CentOS. Steve articulates a very nice sort of continuum on from like Fedora all the way through to RHEL, right? Maybe we can poke on a little bit of the just Red Hat's. So I can't remember how long you guys have been going, but the commitment to open source. So all of the upstreaming work and all of this pioneering work that Red Hat has been doing up to last week's summit, how all that sort of rolls out into the community for other people to pick it up, right? So great to see people like the Rocky Linux folks picking up and committing to RISC-V support for their distro and things like that. So this is really just I think there's almost like the same sort of DNA of Red Hat and its commitment to open source is sort of in a way very much aligned to sort of RISC-V's commitment to the open standard and making sure that all of that goodness is getting out there for other people to pick up. And I sort of think back to a couple of the open source projects that I sort of worked on in my legacy. So one, like the Ceph work, right? The distributed open source storage platform started. Some people attribute it to this Sage Whale guy. Not sure how he pronounced his name. But, there were apparently a number of other professors that laid claim to it. But all of that started in open source because of the dynamics that were going on around storage, and that group of people came up with a differentiated and different way of sort of solving that problem. If we look at now, Ceph deployments in storage servers all over the world, it's become one of the most mandatory things that we've had to sort of get running on RISC-V and have. And the other one is FluentD. When I was at ARM, we invested and subsequently acquired Treasure Data. So that's like a open source data collector architecture that's used by people like Meta and a number of others that aren't announced. And again, then Treasure Data build, commercial support and services on top of that. Again, these projects started not sort of like an iterative step on from something else, but a very disruptive sort of concept based on what they saw going on in the market. And, I think that's the sort of opportunity of innovation that we want to unleash inside the software developer ecosystem, where those people see the problems much more in their faces than maybe we do at SiFive, and really giving those people the tools and the opportunity to build something very, very different based on us getting good enough hardware and great open source software, and then the stability of RHEL out there for people to use as that foundation.
Yeah, and I just want to kind of expound on the fact that you mentioned that there are other Linux distributions also contributing. That's part of the reason we do these things in the open source community. Why do we make sure we're doing that very transparently in Fedora? How do we make sure that CentOS Stream is also a place? Because what we want for the other distributions to contribute, not to just kind of take and kind of replay or rehost bits, is actually contribute to the growth of what is potential here with this particular architecture. So we're looking forward to other distributions also making contributions, playing off of their core strengths or the community's desires in terms of how they actually kind of want to add innovation into the market, so that we can all actually achieve the full potential of what RISC-V or any architecture can bring. But again, with RISC-V being an open standard, knowing there are going to be plenty of people trying to come up with their own designs, maybe target specific markets, so long as we have that constant instruction set that allows us to be able to enable that and then drive the innovation above it, it's going to be fantastic. But we also need the open source community to do the same also, not just kind of replicate.
Yeah.
So Isaac, let's hold this mirror up to you and say to you, you're now responsible for the RISC-V International organization's implementation of software ecosystems. This must have made a huge difference to you, and the task, I guess, that you see in front of you is that you now actually have a very real and integrated ecosystem based on RISC-V products that you can now go and evangelize to the software developers who are contributing other components to the ecosystem and encourage them to join.
I think the mirror just cracked, but anyway. What I would say is, yeah, for me, it was like all my birthdays had come together when I heard that we were doing this developer preview kit on RHEL 10. Because to be honest, despite the fact that I'm working directly with the engineering teams that are doing OS bring up across SUSE, Canonical, and yourselves and others, I didn't realize how far advanced you guys had gotten with your plans. I was anticipating the developer preview kit perhaps in maybe another year to 2 years. That's been very honest. And so you kind of blew away my expectations, but at the same time, I'm cognizant of the fact that some of the major players, such as, you look at the Alibaba, who's a member, right, of RISC-V International, and they've got a chip company as well. They're really taking this serious. You look at NVIDIA, who are a member, they're taking this serious. This, the who's who of the technology zoo, so to speak, are all either members of RISC-V International or RISE as well. More software-centric, of course, on the RISE front. And that is, I've never been in this position in my career where I've seen things coalesce so quickly. I've been more used to pushing the rock up a hill, so to speak, with new silicon architectures, which Ron can attest to, with other endeavors that we had over at RedHat during my tenure there, where, it took a long time just to get the engineering work done and to get the, let's say, even the engineering management buy-in to start blessing what we've already done our Skunkworks projects on, whereas now things are moving at a very advanced clip, I would say. So the reality of, like, when I think of software ecosystem, I think of the entirety of the ecosystem, from the, let's say, the fundamentals that run at the silicon bring up level, the entire way up to the application that a true end customer such as an FSI is running at the very, very top of the stack, right? And of course, there are many stacks depending on what your business case is, etc. Vertical, horizontals, whatever you name it. However, it is a challenge. But for them, for the people that sit up there, the CTO level and others and their engineering teams, they have to be nimble and intelligent and make educated bets. Like the old adage, nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. I used to say the same about storage with EMC. But the fact is this, these people have to make a very educated bet for their businesses. And when they see something of the nature of the developer's preview kit coming really out of left field a lot earlier than anticipated, it really galvanizes the fact that this thing is moving. This thing is, it's not coming, it's here. When you think about how NVIDIA have shipped, I can't remember if it's 1 billion RISC-V processors already or more. You start looking at under the hood in some of these components, and you realize that, hey, all the ASICs are indeed RISC-V based componentry. It is quite startling that it is a rising tide that in some respects lifts all boats, but in other respects you better make sure that you can float in this new ocean, and you need to ensure that you've done the due diligence and the enablement work to adopt that. The fact that RedHat has, in conjunction with SiFive, have announced this developer preview kit specifically on the SiFive card, I imagine that at some point we'll also see this expanded to other cards and other motherboards, in which case then you start to see, growth within the hardware ecosystem as it comes and bakes and grows into the enterprise space. So it is a very exciting time. And I say, thank you very much for everyone involved. And I will give a call out to Gary Case's team and Wei Fu and the people that work in, do Trojan work in Mr. Jones and others, because, they're the unsung heroes of open source engineering in some respects. But yes, this is, I think, how you've positioned this, and the fact that this is coming out to be more of a base foundation for community models in some respects, right? That both RedHat and other people can actually get access to and do something meaningful and useful with, says a lot around RedHat's commitment to open source and willing to contribute. It's, at the end of the day, one of my favorite meetings to sit on is the RISE meeting with Redbeard from RedHat, where we have all the distros in the meeting, major, minor distros, all trying to work towards one goal, and that's like enabling and optimizing RISC-V architecture. I've never been witness to that or privy to that before, and it's really where the rubber meets the road in the true open source sense of the word. If anyone has gotten this far on the call at this stage, and if anyone is a hardware vendor or an I/O adapter vendor, etc., and they're wondering, what can I do? I would say, and I'm going to say this at the end as well, make sure that anything that requires something to be upstream is upstreamed and dropped upstreamed, and you want to talk to all your favorite distribution vendors to ensure that whatever gets upstream gets backported back into the various kernels of the downstream enterprise Linuxes. Don't make the error of build it and they shall come. That only works in the movies with Kevin Costner. I don't think it works anywhere else. So coming back.
It's interesting that you just picked out Kevin, but okay.
Yes.
Yeah, and maybe we get some other questions. Obviously, people can fire in questions as well. I guess one thing I thought we could talk a little bit about is maybe signpost a few things for the future. So what I mean by that, we touched on a little bit on this sort of like, there's this line between standardization and innovation, right? And I'm thinking of innovation in both the hardware and the software form. To Ron's point earlier, there's I think a bit of a misbelief in RISC-V that it's a completely chaotic. You can do whatever you like. You can add instructions and everything's all over the place. The truth is, we have these architectures that are called profiles, and my marketing people will always beat me up, but when you're not meant to mention competitors, but it's just easy so everybody gets it, right? A profile is like ARMv9, right? It's a set of mandatory instructions that have to be there that the software can rely on. And for operating systems, you clearly want to know exactly what instructions are there. And so that alignment to these profiles, and the main one that is being lined up was announced last year, RVA23. That's a set of mandatory instructions, and you will see products from us, SiFive. You'll see products from Tenstorrent and from Revos and others that line up to that instruction set architecture. So again, we get that commonality across the different products. So that's one line of commonality. The second one is around platforms. So earlier this year, RISC-V defined server platform architectures. We'll see other platform architectures coming out for other verticals. And again, let's do innovation in areas where it adds value to a system, not where it causes all sorts of problems for firmware and operating systems and things like that. So, getting a platform woken up to a known standard state, that's kind of the objective of the platform specs. And so, I think this community has done a pretty good job of starting to put those things in place. That it, again, means there's that solid hardware foundation and that solid software foundation on which people can build, right? And I think we need to do that across both hardware and software, that then will catalyze this software innovation. So I think that I wanted just to talk about that. Now in the area of AI, if you think about things like standard APIs like PyTorch, those are places where there are some opportunities for innovation and adding custom instructions and things like that. And we've certainly seen that around hardware accelerators, where people are looking at some of the customizations, and then obviously they'll own that optimized software stack themselves to build that architecture in a way that delivers differentiated power or performance or cost. But when it comes down to core foundational fundamental things, I think the takeaway to think about here are those profiles and those platform specs that will be done in a consistent way. Does that make sense? Steve, Ron, anything to add?
Absolutely. Without open standard, look, the thing is, if you're playing with open standards and the open source industry can align with it, then your ability to drive your innovation is greater than creating your own. You can go off and you can go forth and go create your own instruction set, but then you're somewhat on your own to now go build an ecosystem to actually get you off the ground. Not that you can, but it's going to be a very heavy lift, right? And to your point, and we mentioned earlier, you want to be able to differentiate above that particular stack, because if you're innovating at that stack level, you're going to be stagnant. You're going to be on your own, and you may succeed within the niche, or you just may cease to exist. Right? Yeah. It's you have to make a highly informed business decision as to how fast do you want to grow your market.
Yes, and on that point, I would add this: if anyone's listening or watching and they think that they can create their own Linux distribution and take over the world, you could create your own Linux distribution. You could create your own hypervisor. You could create your own version of Kubernetes. However, it is a monumental task, and other people have cracked how to do it efficiently and effectively. And I would say partner with them. It saves you a lot of time and effort, and focus on the portion of the equation and solution where you can differentiate yourself and your company, and you'll make your life a lot easier. Because at the end of the day, none of the distro people that I talk to across the multitude of Linux distributions, and also even other distributions outside the realm of Linux, none of the hypervisor people, none of the virtualization people, none of the container people that I know would want to be supporting for somebody that's not conforming to the accepted standards. It just becomes a self-perpetuating. Has anybody got any questions around Linux enablement on RISC-V, the complexities around this, standards? You know, I'm not even sure if most people are on here or will be listening to this truly understand, Steve, the continuum, the begottings that happen with regard to upstream kernel, Fedora, CentOS stream, RHEL, etc. Do you want to just give a kind of a brief kind of lineage there? Because it is a complex beast of enablement that has to happen in a chain of events.
Before we get too deeply into that, let me just echo something that Ian was saying earlier regarding community. I would say that the work that we, Red Hat, have done with the developers preview implementation of RHEL 10 are 100% our intention was to put this into the community. As we've been working through the project, so we've been pushing code and making upstream commitments and merge requests to make sure that come the beginning of next week, when all of the code and the bootable images is available to the community, that not only is the source code available, but all the upstream commits and merge requests are in place. Because Ian was talking earlier, and I think you referred to it as well, Isaac, about what does the future look like. The future looks like where the community is going to take it. It's our intention to make sure that the next steps in this developers preview project are really driven out of the CentOS community. So it's our intention to place all of the work that we've done into the community, so that in the future, if, for example, there are very eligible pieces of hardware from SiFive that need to get supported by this, we can work with SiFive to place hardware into the Koji servers that are used to build the implementations of CentOS, such that the community drives this first before it gets to us.
And Steve, if I'm not mistaken, perhaps we can find a link to the CentOS blog on this. This is something that's actually going to happen literally in a matter of days. The target date is June 1st. They have it available up into CentOS stream. Something had to do with infrastructure and resources, and of course, we want to be good citizens and help the communities wherever we possibly can. This is a good example of where there's a little bit of the cart before the horse, because we rather have CentOS stream first, but there was a resource issue that CentOS stream was facing that we're helping to bridge, right? And then to your point, then get it back to business as usual. We want the work done in the open source community, drive that rapid innovation, particularly around low-level software in Fedora, which also helps with the hardware enablement, drive some of that maturation up into CentOS stream, and then from there, we inherit into RHEL, because CentOS stream is the upstream for RHEL, the commercial product. We want to continue to maintain that as the mechanism, because it gives the communities at large, whether they're open source or commercial, hardware versus software, plenty of choice as to where and how they want to do their development. Hopefully, they're making their contributions into the communities that everybody can benefit from.
And thank you, Ian, for posting the blog link in the chat. What I would say to the question that was raised about that cascading level of products, Red Hat Enterprise Linux takes all of its innovation, so new components of technology, from Fedora. So for us, the community implementation of Fedora is where all new technology starts. And if you've been watching the Fedora for the last couple of releases, the fact that we now have a developer's preview for RHEL 10 on RISC-V will come as absolutely no surprise. You will have seen multiple implementations of Fedora on RISC-V. Just literally, I think 2 weeks ago, when Fedora 42 was announced, even though RISC-V isn't yet an official architecture, within 24 hours of the announcement of Fedora 42, there was a RISC-V implementation available for it. And so that work is very much in hand, in place, going on all the time. Red Hat Enterprise Linux picks up its innovation from Fedora. The CentOS component for Red Hat Enterprise Linux is essentially where that innovation goes to get polished prior to it being fully assimilated into Red Hat Enterprise Linux. For us, the implementation of the RISC-V instruction set was the first time that we've had to build a RHEL implementation, but with our eyes on the fact that it needed to go into CentOS. And so you'll notice that an awful lot of our announcements around RISC-V implementation has been pointing towards CentOS. So the date for availability of the sources, the binaries, etc., was set as June the 1st. That's a Sunday, and I don't particularly want to make anybody work on over their weekend. So if I was you, I'd go looking for it towards the early hours of Monday morning, as Europe comes online before the States does, in order to find it.
All right. Well, I'm going to personally check on you, Steve, early in the morning on Sunday, just to make sure you're online.
Yeah, I thought you had rules over there about, never on a Friday, never on a Monday, and all that jazz. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's probably time to start wrapping it up. Conscious of time here, and so, Ian, is there anything additional that you'd like to add to this? From a closing remarks perspective.
I really liked. I thought I was trying to come up with something clever, but I thought Steve's comment about the future of this is where the community takes it. I thought that was spot on. And what we're trying to do here is really inspire and catalyze that innovation, whether that's inside enterprises, such as the sort of places and use cases that Steve was talking about, or individual developers just with a great idea. And I think we're at the start of that. Maybe not the start of the journey, because we've been going for a while, but I think this formalization of RHEL really means, with the developer preview, really gives that sort of foundational framework for a new class of developers to go and have at it. And that's my excitement about the pioneering work and announcements that Red Hat did last week at Summit, and we're just really excited for the future.
So to steal somebody else's quote, Ian, I would say that we're at the end of the beginning.
Have you got a whole book of these things? So it's like, wow,
it's all up in there. What I would say is, if I mean, as an ending line, what I would say is, if you have an interest in the success of RISC-V, if you have an interest in the future of what enterprise computing is going to look like, and the availability of the developer's preview of RHEL 10 on RISC-V excites you, get involved. Become a member of the CentOS community. Actually contribute towards the work that's going on. I would encourage anybody who has an interest to become part of the community. Ron, I see you've just come off mute.
Yeah, that's a couple of things. I think, there are a lot of people who have already made massive contributions into the open source community. I can't name them all. I'll thank all of you for those contributions. I would also thank the members of RISC-V International and RISE, because they're making commitments, public commitments. It's also important to continue to drive the open standards, drive and donate the more important contributions either into the Linux Foundation or CNCF, so that they remain open and flexible to everyone to be able to benefit from it. Certainly, we do want to thank Ian and the SiFive team for partner with us to make that demo happen. Thank you for that, Ian, and others that work with the engineering teams at Red Hat to make that a reality. If you didn't get a chance to see the summit, it was absolutely mind blowing to actually see. Gosh, this thing just looks so beautiful. By the way, I can use that monitor back, whoever has it. No, I just put it kidding aside, but it is indeed the beginning with commercial product. That's the key thing, right? We're not playing with synthetic goods. Continue to drive the innovation, continue to drive the contributions. Please download the RHEL 10 developers preview. Provide us the feedback. This is where we're all going to learn, right? Certainly, Red Hat will learn directly from the feedback. SiFive will learn directly from the feedback, but so will the rest of the community, particularly if we're doing it in the open domain. And that's what we're all trying to drive. And then together we can add another architecture in the market to drive yet another level of innovation in our incessantly growing digital economy, where what we're doing here is foundational, but what we're actually doing is creating the possibility for what has yet to come.
Awesome.
Okay, and just to finish up, I'll refer back to something that Stephanie Chira said last week at the summit, where she regarded, at the end of the day, it's all about partnering to provide a solution and support to end customers. And when I think about working across these, you guys with your various companies and all the other companies that I work with, when you think about the main distributions, each one of those distributions has their own set of ecosystem software partners that in turn will start working with the RISC-V ecosystem as the platform starts to rise into their inter-perspective views. And I think I would also encourage people to, if you're a software company, consider about joining Rise. It's a great program out there, looking, helping enable the RISC-V software ecosystem. If you're a hardware company, I would say you should be considering joining RISC-V International. And here's the hidden extra: you don't have to be a company. You can join as a private member. Now, that might require that you have to ask for permission from your legal team or your management to allow you to work within the RISC-V domain, but it is all open source. So, open standards, open source, nothing hidden, which is kind of cool. So there's room for everyone, and at the end of the day, it is all about collaboration. And yeah, RISC-V from its conception was an extendable architecture, between what we can do with open source and how we can develop the software to where it needs to go to, because none of us has crystal balls when it comes to what's the future hold. 10 years from now, who knows what the solution may be? And to quote David Patterson, x86 took us the last 50 years. RISC-V is going to take us the next 50. So on that note, I'm going to say thank you very much to Ron, to Ian, to Steve, and to your respective companies for your investment in RISC-V. And, look forward to more exciting news as we traverse the universe of hardware silicon enablement and software ecosystem enablement. Thank you very much. Thank you for everyone who's tuned in, who's listened to this after the fact or during the fact. Much appreciated. Stay tuned. We will have more installments coming in the future with various other partners within the RISE ecosystem and RISC-V International. Thank you very much. Bye now.
Thank you.